Welcome back to CBS Mornings. CBS News is launching a new investigative series that looks at the disturbing rise in unsolved murder cases nationwide. Crime Without Punishment is a joint investigation between CBS stations across the country and our investigative team here in New York. Today in the U.S., there's about a 50-50 chance that a killer will never be arrested after taking someone's life, especially if the victim is Hispanic or Black. For police departments in cities like Philadelphia, it's a huge challenge. In the first of three very powerful stories this week, Chief Investigative Correspondent Jim Axelrod went inside Philadelphia's homicide unit to see firsthand why it's so hard to solve murder cases. Jim, good morning.
Good morning. There were more than 500 homicides in Philadelphia last year, and that is more than ever before. And still, more than half remain unsolved. We wanted to see why, so we visited the Philadelphia Police Department, the fourth largest in the country. And what we found were detectives overloaded, overwhelmed, and wide awake on a Thursday morning at 4 a.m.
It is just after dawn in Philadelphia.
This is going to happen pretty fast once they get out. We'll jump out now.
Yeah. Like they do 2 to 3 times every week, detectives from the city's homicide unit, along with a SWAT team, are raiding a house where they believe a murder suspect is holed up. They are looking for the man getting out of this car in this video, who they think then shot and killed an Uber driver in a case of mistaken identity. On this morning, the raid is successful.
Yeah, we have 2 suspects in custody.
As they take 2 men wanted in connection with the shooting into custody. Philadelphia homicide detective Joe Murray.
At this point, are you feeling optimistic?
So far, so good. But right now, we're off to a good start.
Murray and the 5 other detectives in his unit spend each day confronting one of the most troubling questions in law enforcement today. Why do so many murders now go unsolved and unpunished in America?
For us, it's the volume.
562 homicides were committed in Philadelphia last year. That's about 11 each week.
It's the number of murders, and we just keep going and going and going. It's just, the volume just comes in and it just crushes you.
In the 1960s, police solved 8 out of every 10 murder cases in America. Today, it's barely 1 in 2.
Nationwide, it's a 50-50 coin flip.
Thomas Hargrove runs the Murder Accountability Project, a nonprofit that tracks the homicide clearance rate. That's how often the police solve murder cases.
It has never been this bad. During the last 7 months of 2020, most murders went unsolved, and that's never happened before in America.
And today, everything changed. Technology is the key.
As Philadelphia's Chief Inspector Frank Venor told us, more than just gumshoe detectives combing a crime scene for shell casings and buttonholing witnesses.
Just about every murder has sometimes dozens of sources of video.
These days, the focus of the first 48 hours after a homicide, the most crucial stretch for investigators, is gathering video.
Video has become our new witness.
We visited Philadelphia 5 days after a shooting on South Street, a bustling commercial center, left 3 dead and 11 wounded.
The area is blanketed by video surveillance.
During that time, lead investigator Captain Jason Smith's team gathered no less than 45 angles of the shooting. But this modern-day dragnet of sweeping social media and canvassing businesses for video is time-consuming, often requiring warrants and subpoenas. But it works. While they were showing us footage from the South Street shooting, detectives got word of 2 more arrests.
They're in custody.
You just got word.
Just got word right now.
You feel that the arrests were made so quickly because of the video that you have?
Without a doubt.
But for all the technology, it's no match for what cops and chiefs told our investigative teams at CBS stations across the country. What hinders murder investigations most is the breakdown between police and communities of color in a post-George Floyd world.
There's a trust factor that we lost along the way, and we try every day to build that trust factor back up.
Our investigative data team analyzed unsolved murders across the country. The rate of arrests over the last 30 years when the victim is white has risen above 85%. Watch how the rate declines when the victim is Hispanic. And even fewer arrests are made when the victim is black.
The disparity is stunning.
It is stunning. It's not just here. It's not just here.
Danielle Outlaw is the commissioner of the Philadelphia Police Department.
This disparity isn't 5 or 10 points.
No,
this
you're
disparity
absolutely right.
is gaping.
Yes.
Are black murders pursued as aggressively?
Yes.
As urgently?
Yes.
With the same amount of manpower?
Yes. Yes. Again, it's
so
across.
So then why do you end up with this kind of disparity?
I think it's obvious. I'm a black woman, and I run the 4th largest police department in the country. What we need is a collaborative effort in solving these cases and an acknowledgement to what I think is there now, that it's going to take more than the police to clear these cases.
And sometimes it sounds like what's implicit is that the community of color needs to trust the police more.
No, not at all. We're talking about historically issues, systemic inequities that contribute to the mistrust, and then also things that the police have done and we've gotten in our own way. It has to be a two-way street, as it is with any relationship.
Just an arrest is enough to move a murder case into the cleared column, even if the suspect still awaits a hearing, as this man now is. This counts as a good day for the beleaguered detectives in Philadelphia, who don't have time to examine the trends. They're too busy trying to reverse them.
And tomorrow we're going to report on the toll unsolved murders take on a community. We visit with a group of mothers in Jackson, Mississippi, who know the crushing pain of losing their child and are struggling to find justice.
You know, Jim, when Commissioner Outlaw says she understands these historical issues, systemic inequities that contribute to the mistrust, they understand the issue. The question is, how do you fix it going forward?
Right. Her point being, what I was pressing her on was, why do you hear the community has to do better? The community has to do better. Isn't it a question of the community and the police understanding the cooperation that's
having that
required to
trust?
solve it? That's right. And so her point was, yes, I agree. It is not just the community of color that needs to do better to elevate the rate of clearing murder cases. The police have to do better as well.
Yeah, but it's hard when neither side trusts the other, though, but there are bruised feelings on both sides. It's very tough, but it's tough to see the disparity in black and white the way you just showed it to us.
For sure.
Thank you, Jim.
We are continuing our series, Crime Without Punishment, that looks at the disturbing rise in unsolved murders in the U.S. Welcome back to CBS Mornings. Our investigation uncovered a troubling racial disparity. Murder cases are far less likely to be solved if the victim is Hispanic or black. Jackson, Mississippi has experienced a spike in killings, with more than 150 murders last year, and about 4 in 10 remain unsolved. Chief Investigative Correspondent Jim Axelrod went to Jackson to see the toll of unsolved murders on the relatives of those who have been killed. Jim, good morning.
Good morning. There are the numbers and the pain behind the numbers. We traveled to Jackson last month to meet with a small group of mothers who'd lost their sons. What we found was a community seething with frustration that more isn't being done to track down the killers of their children. We also found an overwhelmed police department that says it can't possibly keep pace with the violence.
Everyone in this room who has had a member of their family murdered, raise your hand.
When we started calling mothers who'd lost their children to murder in Jackson, Mississippi, word got around, and more than 30 people arrived for our interview.
Put your hands up if you feel like you've had to investigate your own loved one's death.
The pain in this room in Jackson was overwhelming.
They didn't investigate my case.
And more just kept coming, wanting their stories heard.
Even the detective when I talked to them, they hung the phone up in my face.
Willie Mack is himself a former homicide detective at the Jackson Police Department.
What an ambulance at?
His daughter was shot to death in 2017.
Hang on, how many years were you with Jackson PD?
24 years.
You had 24 years in, and when you call the detective investigating your daughter's death, you don't get your calls returned?
I don't get no call returned.
To understand better the depth of their suffering, we sat down with 3 mothers from the group.
My son, his name is Kenlon Thompson, Jr. He was murdered April the 1st, 2021.
Zachary Ryan Robinson. He was murdered on April 29th of 2014.
Ryan, he was murdered November 26, 2020 on Thanksgiving, a day after my birthday.
Margie Allen, Danita Williams, and Lucinda Wade Robinson are talking about their sons, all younger than 22, all gunned down in the city of Jackson, Mississippi. Population, 153,000.
Has there been any arrest made in either of these three cases?
No.
Not one arrest?
I was showed a picture of my baby on the side of the road. I was showed some information, and I was told to go solve my own crime.
Go solve your own crime?
And bring them the evidence, and I would take it to them.
In Jackson, the capital of Mississippi, the numbers are stunning. 156 homicides last year, one of the highest per capita homicide rates in the entire country.
Do you feel murder is being treated differently here?
Murder is at the bottom of the totem pole. It's normal. A young black male is going to die tomorrow. We have 3 over the weekend. We can't get to you right now.
The whole system is backlogged.
James Davis is the chief of the Jackson Police Department.
Does not solving homicide cases erode the trust the community has in the police department?
Of course, we tell these citizens the truth. We don't tell them that we can solve a case without the facts, you know?
Chief Davis told us Jackson PD's ability to solve murder cases depends on processing evidence at the state crime lab, which he says is overwhelmed.
I can use more police officers. I could use more homicide detectives. But if the state is backed up, the court is backed up, we will still have the same problem by developing these cases that we're already doing.
FBI research suggests homicide detectives should oversee no more than 5 cases per year. Jackson PD has 8 full-time detectives. That's enough for 40 murder investigations. Last year alone, they had nearly 4 times that number.
I don't think any police department in the nation can say that they got enough resources.
Jackson homicide detective Sergeant Kevin Nash works in an office where each desk is piled high with files. He knows that means victims' relatives aren't going to like the pace of solving their loved one's murder.
Sergeant Nash, I talked to him and he said, well, you know, a lot of y'all come down here and act like y'all children are perfect. I said, no. I said, first of all, I'm not acting like my child is perfect, but my child did not deserve to be killed in the street.
But Sergeant Nash says he and his colleagues are doing the best they can.
I'll be honest with you, when your loved one is killed, you can never do enough to solve that case. I call them back when I'm available. It may not be right then when they want to. And remember, if this was your child, you want immediate answers too.
I will always tell you that the Jackson Police Department can do a better job.
Jackson Mayor Chokwe Antar Lumumba knows all too well what unsolved crime can do to a family.
My brother was shot in the head in Jackson, Mississippi. So we're no friend of crime, right? And no one was ever arrested for that.
But points out his police department makes arrests in 6 out of 10 cases, above the national average.
I get the feeling no matter how often you talk about it, the tears don't stop.
No, no.
You just lay in bed at night and just cry all night, and you get up and try to fight more to get justice for your child. It's too much.
Well, it turns out that 3 weeks after we visited, Jackson police made arrests in the case of Margie Allen's son, a year and a half after his murder. Jackson PD told us it was a long investigation, and they just kept following the leads. Now, tomorrow, we'll bring you our 3rd story in the series, which takes us to Baltimore and focus on possible solutions to help police solve more murder cases.
The pain is palpable. You can feel it on the screen. Just the fact that one mother would say murder is normal here.
It is among the highest per capita homicide rates in the country. The ballroom where these people spoke with us was one of the more emotionally riveting, powerful places I've ever been. We invited just a few, and they just kept coming.
But just the fact that the mother said that the police said, go solve it yourself and bring us the evidence.
You know,
what's wrong with that, Jim?
Or Mr. Willie Mack, who's a former detective.
I get that you're overwhelmed, but as a grieving mother, nobody wants to hear that. Go solve it yourself.
So when we put that question to the detectives, they said, look, the numbers are what they are. These guidelines say we should have 5 cases. We have 4 times that number. We're drinking water from a fire hose here, and we're doing the best we can.
feel for those families.
I do too.
That weight, it lasts forever on top of it.
And based on what you said, it's also overwhelming for the police. So it's not just that they don't want to do it or that they're callous. You're saying it's more of a problem they don't have enough resources to do it.
So 2 days of demonstrating problems, tomorrow a solution pegged exactly at that.
Looking forward to that. Great job. Thank you very much, as always. We appreciate it.
Back to CBS Mornings, we continue our special series. We call it Crime Without Punishment, looking at the disturbing rise in unsolved murder cases in this country. We've shown why some big city police departments cannot keep pace with the rising number of killings and how it has made the families of the murder victims very frustrated and very angry. This morning, we look at a potential solution, a federal, state, and local partnership that could be, we say could be, a model for other cities. Chief Investigative Correspondent, that's Jim Axelrod, went to Baltimore to learn exactly how it works. They have some history in doing this kind of thing.
They do. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What we kept hearing from police chief after police chief, detective after detective, in our collaborative investigation done by CBS News and local CBS stations around the country were descriptions of a crippling shortage of manpower and resources. In Baltimore, we found an approach that seems to be gaining some traction in addressing these shortages and solving more murders. Teamwork.
His killer was standing on that end.
So far this week, we've documented a troubling trend.
Were people getting away with murder?
The rate of making arrests in murder cases is at a 50-year low.
Baltimore police are pleading for help as they work to solve 16 shootings and 28 armed robberies.
Baltimore is no different, where police solve less than half of the homicides. Except here.
Plenty of room, big space.
They just might be finding a solution to this disturbing problem.
There it is.
It's an approach overseen by Eric Barron, the U.S. Attorney in Maryland. Barron hopes to boost the rate of homicide arrests with more intelligence developed from a partnership housed in a nondescript warehouse in a secured location we've been asked to conceal.
This is the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force.
Morning, you had a couple search warrants you did?
A strike force of local and federal authorities taking aim at Baltimore's violent crime.
The law enforcement community is so balkanized. You got local, state, federal. Here is where we can put all or most of them together in one place, sharing information, working together.
16 people, you heard that right, shot over the weekend alone.
We visited after a violent Father's Day weekend added 6 new homicides to the city's total.
So this is a map that we generated of all the homicides and shootings in 2021 in Baltimore City.
Intelligence analyst Billy Nichols is the dot connector in chief here. At least 338 homicides in red last year alone.
They are in every portion of the city.
Each morning, Nichols opens an email with what's called a 24, a fresh report of each homicide, shooting, and questionable death in the city in the last 24 hours.
The first thing I'm looking for is really to see whether or not our victim has anything to do with any of our cases. Because, you know, if that's the case, then it seems the logical thought would be it has something to do with the ongoing investigation.
Nichols worked the streets for more than 20 years as a Baltimore police officer.
So you might get something in a 24 that connects up to another homicide investigation.
Or another federal investigation.
Triple C was as organized and savvy as they are violent and relentless.
The idea is to build big cases that take lots of murderers off the street at once, like the 15 Triple C gang members linked to 18 homicides and 27 other attempts. They were indicted last summer on drug, racketeering, and conspiracy charges.
This business was built on violence, murders and shootings of rival gang members and drug dealers.
John Lenzner was the acting U.S. attorney in Baltimore at the time.
One indictment can not only lead to violent gang members serving in prison, but can also help a city clear a number of homicides that have gone unsolved for a number of years.
Eric Barron, the current U.S. attorney, calls it the Al Capone strategy. The violent mob boss wasn't busted for murder in the 1930s. He was convicted on tax evasion charges.
The problem is a 50-year low in clearing murder cases. The solution, if I hear you right, is cooperation.
Absolutely. It's the biggest part of the solution. Cooperation, not just among law enforcement, but the community as well.
It all boils down to teamwork, it seems.
Yeah, and after demonstrating the extent of this problem for a couple days, it's refreshing to hear somebody talking about solutions.
Why do they want to keep the location a secret?
I think there is such pressure, first of all, to find something. The Department of Justice overseeing this, always cautious by nature, wants to make sure nothing gets in the way by way of contamination or compromise.
And there has been some issues in years past with the BPD, right? It was some corruption that was a big story nationwide.
Yeah. And that speaks to what we found in all cities,
which
is that compromises the relationship between police and community, and without that cooperation, you have an issue. So to restore the trust that's been eroded, everyone we talked through, the entire investigation says that is the key. Community police restoration of trust is the answer to reducing this disturbing trend.
Your stories yesterday were so heartbreaking this week, where mothers are asked to solve their own crimes. It's nice to see that there is some solution that could possibly work.
Right.
Yeah.
Also nice to see us doing this kind of a project.
Exactly.
Working with our stations across the country.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Broad reach.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, thank you. Nice to sit with you.
Great to be here.
Morning. Good to see you. All right.
We're going to go deeper with CBS News investigative data journalist Christopher Hacker, who's joining us now. Christopher, this is such an interesting piece, and we heard that police are only solving about half of the murders in the U.S., the lowest rate ever recorded. Why is this happening?
So in 1960, which is the first year the data was available from the FBI, the police reported solving more than 8 in 10 cases. But policing and data collection has, changed a lot since then. But even through the 1980s, it was still 7 out of 10 homicides. Then when murders spiked in the 1990s to even higher levels than they did in 2020, they were still around 6 out of 10. But in 2020, this was the first year that this national clearance rate fell to just 1 in 2, meaning it's now just a coin toss as to whether a murder is solved.
Well, there's also a major disparity, as we heard, by race in homicide clearance rates. What more can you explain about this?
So it was difficult for us to get reliable national law enforcement clearance data that included race. So we used something called FBI supplemental homicide reports. And that data showed that the clearance rate for white victims has been steadily increasing since the 1990s, while conversely, the clearance rate for black victims has continued to decline. And there's always been a disparity between the two groups, but in 1995, that difference was just about 10 points. Now in 2020, it's more than double that, a 28-point difference, which means that the homicides of white victims are now about 50% more likely to be solved.
So we're still trying, and this is perhaps going to encourage more people to watch the documentary, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around all this. Maybe you can tell us more about the result of homicide cases in your city of Chicago.
Yeah, we had some really interesting findings in Chicago, because in this city where I'm based, police don't actually report case clearance data to the FBI at all. That just appears to be completely blank in their data. So we had to actually go to that department and ask them for the data through the Freedom of Information Act. When they sent us that data, I realized that they'd included information that differentiated cases that were cleared because someone was arrested and cases that were cleared for other reasons. These are what police call exceptional clearances, and they're supposed to be very rare, experts have told us. They're supposed to be for cases like when police identify a suspect, but that suspect is dead, for example. But in Chicago in 2021, they made up nearly half of the city's quote-unquote solved murder cases. Now, we don't have enough data to know for certain if this is something that happens in other places at the same rates, because we don't have the data, but if each department used exceptional clearance, even half the rate of the Chicago police, that national solve rate already at 50% could be much, much lower.
So interesting. Chris Hacker, really excited to see the results of all of your work on that